All right. So, Krystal, I was in Sao Paulo. I'm interviewing a guy. This month is intense. Next week, Cornel West, right? Lula and Cornel West. These are two big deals to me. And I'm also in Brazil. So I'm not really like super up on my phone. And then I see, before I leave, apparently there's some sort of canvassing talking point. We don't know whether or not it's even real. And if it is real, fine.
Right.
If it isn't real, it's nothing. It's just a truism. Then, a couple of different steps. All of a sudden, actually, can we throw up that Sopranos meme before I throw to Krystal? Have you seen this Sopranos meme?
I don't know.
I want to show you this because this is my interpretation of what happens. Although the difference is I want to give Paulie Walnuts credit here because Paulie Walnuts actually, at least it was in real time. All right, we'll get to that in a second. Okay, all right. Well, it's in the show outline, so we'll get to it in a second. What the fuck just happened?
You know exactly what just happened.
I mean, it's disgusting, and you've been covering it perfectly.
It's just a blatant political ploy. Throw your friend under the bus for your own gain. That's all it is. It's plain and simple. And you know what's so ironic? I love that. I'm glad that you started with the beginning of the week and Elizabeth Warren's feigned outrage. How could you, Bernie, right? How could you have a volunteer script that accurately points out that who is in my coalition, right? And then the very next day, or you leak this thing to CNN that supposedly Bernie Sanders is this massive sexist and told you a woman could never be president. I mean, it's just ridiculous, right? And we all can see it's coming down to the wire. Only, 2 weeks basically now till Iowa. She's got all these like ex-Clinton apparatchiks that she staffed her team with. And they told her, look, polls aren't looking good. You got to make something happen. And there's this fork in the road, right? She can either go after Joe Biden, who is the front runner, who has a long track record of doing actual harm to women, who in a past life, Elizabeth Warren excoriated for his record. Said you can't claim to be a champion of women in the morning and sell them out in the evening. So I'm paraphrasing, but that was basically what she had to say. And had this great analysis of how, supporting women isn't just about like a few token issues. It's about supporting every aspect of their lives and their humanity and their dignity, as we were just saying. And if you aren't a part of that, if you'd rather serve your corporate masters and the credit card issuers that come from your state, then you are no ally of women. That is literally the message that brought Elizabeth Warren into politics, literally in opposition to Joe Biden. So here she is, right? Coming down to it. You're on one of the biggest stages imaginable. And you can either launch that righteous attack on Joe Biden, who very much could be the nominee, or you could launch this, pack of lies, scurrilous, nasty personal attack on your supposed friend who you've been buddy-buddy with all year and telling us all that we can't divide, we can't possibly make any critique or discuss the differences between the two of them.
Definitely don't talk about her voting record.
No, can't do that.
Horrible.
Can't do that.
Totally evil.
But so she has this choice and she decides to go after her friend and do incredible damage to the progressive movement. And look, I think everyone saw through it. Everyone that, is at all persuadable saw through it. It just looks like the complete political ploy and personal betrayal that it was. But there's an opportunity cost because, as you know, the Sanders team they were ramping up to make a major critique of Joe Biden. We were all talking about the Iraq war vote. In particular, John Kerry had to get trotted out to defend him on this thing. He still doesn't have any good answer on it.
John Kerry is like, your effective Iraq answer from 2004.
Right. Exactly.
Let's go.
So this is all queued up. And rather than having a news cycle that's about issues of war and peace and the judgment of a potential commander-in-chief, we have to talk about what was said in a private conversation between two friends over a year ago. How does that affect any voter's life, by the way? Look,
right.
Bernie didn't say what she's like. It's
course not.
Obviously not.
Yes.
But let's say he did. Honestly,
So what?
How many feminists after Hillary Clinton lost talked about the sexism she faced and how that was a contributor to her loss? The natural conclusion from that analysis is it's harder for a woman to win. That is the natural conclusion. And so the other part of this, as a woman that I find, as someone who...
Look at this piece that Matt just pulled up.
Right.
Emily's
From
list was
Emily's list.
Right.
Yeah. I'm
Right.
sorry. Keep going. I just want to
so
underline what you're saying.
The other thing, like as a woman who, by the way, ran for office and saw a little bit of sexism out there on the trail.
A little bit.
Now, basically, you've made it so we can't even have that discussion, honestly. Like, we can't be open about the realities of running as a woman. It's just like so wrong and nasty on every level. It's completely exposed. Like I saw my old colleague Joyanne Reed this morning brought in. Did you guys
Well,
see
we're gonna
this?
get to that in a second.
Okay, all right. I'll put
Let's
up.
put
I'll
up
put
the Sopranos meme, please. The only thing I want to say as I walk through this is that to Paulie Walnut's credit, at least this is in real time and not 14 months later. But this is the great Pine Barrens episode.
Yes.
This is Warren as Paulie Walnuts. Hey, Bern, I just want to let you know I'm going to run for president. And then Bernie, like, congrats, that's great. Be careful because Trump is a racist, sexist liar who will weaponize whatever he can against you. Paulie Walnuts to Christopher. You hear that shit? He said a woman could never be president. And that summarizes everything. But I think, except again, at least Paulie just got off of the phone with a bad cell connection.
And was really
Pine
cold.
Barrens. And it was really cold, and his blood sugar was bad, and he wasn't supposed to kill the Russian guy, but maybe the Russian isn't even dead. But the thing is that, I mean, here's what I want to touch on about this, though, that really, there's so many things about this that drive me crazy. I mean, one you pointed out is just that it's disgusting on a personal level. And that's sort of like, it sucks, it's disgusting, but like, okay, it's politics, I guess. And then the next one is I'm not convinced. I think she does have a back channel to Joe Biden, if I had to guess. And I certainly am not somebody who, well, I've said for a long time, and I used to get a lot of pushback because I would say I'm not, every time people would spin these like fantasy scenarios about them like running together but against each other or whatever people were cooking up in their heads, I was like, I'm not convinced that, look, I think if it goes to a broker convention, there's deal making and horse trading. And it could go either way. I'm not at all convinced that she would just go to Bernie. I never was.
Why would you think that? I mean,
I
she
don't
had
know.
a chance to help Bernie last time, and she didn't do it.
Well,
She
I mean,
waited around, and then, when it was safe, decided to back the person that she thought could make her Treasury Secretary or whatever. Like, that to
Right.
me was the beginning of, that is when she decided, I'm going to be an establishment player.
Right.
That's like the best, most charitable interpretation is that she convinced herself that's the way to have the most influence and impact. But it's the road to hell, because ultimately you just keep selling off these pieces of your soul. You can justify just about anything if you think, well, if that will just put me in a position of power, I will be in the position to make these changes and help women and families the way that I know that I can. I mean, I think that's the way the Clintons think about a lot of this stuff.
I think that's true, but I guess, yeah, I think that's all 100% right. And then the other things, it's like, okay, the discourse around her was so policed that like I couldn't even like literally, I mean, because it's just not even worth the battle. But I used to do, I did a bit last year at a live show where it's like, what my fantasy, of course, is that Bernie will do Trump style rallies because that would be hilarious.
Right.
And he comes out and he's like, wandering Dolezal, everybody. She could have endorsed me, but she didn't because she's wandering Dol. But she says she's Native American, but she's not. And she had a Cherokee recipe. But it's a lie, like I would love to see it. Yeah, powwow chow. So, and I was willing to, and what was funny to me was that like, I do think there was some segment of people that probably hated her irrationally. And then there was another group of people that I actually, even though they still whined about it constantly, I acquiesced to. I was like, okay, let's take a whole bunch of stuff off the table. Let's not even talk about things that frankly, like, just objectively, regardless of what I personally think about it, are going to be a problem in a general election.
Yeah.
Like you can like, uptight and, like sort of, tone police everybody in a primary to not talk about her saying she was Native American for decades. And then in a general election, it's going to be a massive fat target. So that was one thing. And then it overlapped with this really concerning thing about progressive politics to me, which is just like people living in a fantasy life, which is like, ironically, like I think it's sleazy what she did 100%. But I think for the past over a year, they both should have been respectfully saying, this is why I think that because we're running against each other.
Right.
So people have this like, it's going to be like some movie, and at the end of the Olympics, one of them is going to be hurt, and then they're going to put the arms around each other and walk. It's like they're running against each other. So if there was this other fantasy world, then Bernie wouldn't be running or she wouldn't be running. They're in conflict. And I guess one, it's that obviously all of that game playing was always to the benefit of Warren. But I think it also reveals a mindset that is still really fundamentally unserious about acquiring power. And that disturbs me.
Yes. Like, of course she's going to try to win. And you're right. I mean, this was ultimately, because it was so ugly and obviously a political ploy, I think it backfired. I don't think this is going to serve her. I don't think it's going to hurt Bernie, other than the opportunity cost of not having the focus on Biden, which is real and which is important. But yeah, she and her team, and Pete, we should say too, like, these are people that are playing to win, and they will use the tactics that are necessary. It was always obvious to me from the beginning that the progressives who are making the unity argument of like, let's have a détente, let's not critique each other, et cetera, well, they wanted to spin this narrative where Bernie and Warren are just the same, except she's a woman and she's younger, so obviously we should go with her. Right? Exactly. I mean, that was the thing.
Right. It was always the subtext.
But it was only applied in one direction, right? On the other hand, you were allowed to go on MSNBC and be like, well, you don't have to be a sexist to vote for Bernie, and he's angry and divisive and a grouchy old man and all those things. I like the grouchy old man part personally, but
like his response to Tom Steyer.
What he was like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, like, okay, good.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that was awesome. Just total cold shoulder.
Yeah, okay, good. But it was always obvious to me that whole framing was meant to benefit Warren, because it's true. If you just put them up, if you say, oh, they're exactly the same, except she's a woman and she's younger, yeah, you probably go with her.
Right.
But if you're allowed to talk about the very real differences, and I had the same right, part of, I think, why I have such an emotional response to this thing and had such a hard time getting over it, is because of the amount of blowback that I would get from talking about, like, okay, where is she really on Medicare for all? And what does this look like? And, what is her theory of change? And how does she view movement politics? Because she's adopting some of the rhetoric, but she hasn't been there for the fights. Like, those are real things. They're not meant to be personal. They're not meant to be ugly. They just are the reality. We talked a lot about their different coalitions, the same as the volunteer call script that got them so upset. And the amount of blowback that I got for that versus now the people are like going to the mat over the right of Elizabeth Warren to smear her longtime friend and great ally of women as sexist is just, it's completely outrageous and hypocritical.
Yeah, and I think it also reveals another problem, which is, and I want to be really, I think this is something I always try to articulate on this show, that like, I'm not for a second going to confuse the really serious commitment to equity, civil rights, and all of these areas on like actual substantive policy grounds and as public values with like just the toxicity and stupidity of like Twitter games and woke performance art and all of this other stuff, which is repulsive to every category of normal person.
Yes.
And I'll be really clear, by normal, I mean, I know transgender people who are not obsessed with politics. I know working class Jewish people. Like, I'm saying, if you're not sitting on Twitter and you don't think like, oh my God, like, did you see this new like Hillary Clinton, Elizabeth Warren dragon meme? Then you're probably a normal person. And I think you find like the moralism, the control freakery, the confusion of manners with substance, and also, frankly, this, which is like most human beings perceive it as like, wow, that's some really dirty shit to do to somebody who's bent over backwards for you. And only in a world where you're literally viewing things through like pure essentialist identity, which ironically like does dehumanize women, because you're literally just like, well, I mean, women are just like avatars of morality.
Right.
They're definitionally right. And then you get these like embarrassing, terrifying pieces like in the LA Times where that Virginia Heffernan woman, which it's like this, it starts to look like this is like psychopathology. It's not politics.
Well, the part of this that conflated Warren smearing Bernie a sexist with the whole like Me Too, believe women, like I'm just like, what is wrong with you? I don't know if you saw, we played it on our show. Chris Cuomo did this handoff with Don Lemon. He's like, well, we know what happened because we have a woman who told us what happened.
Wow.
It's like, I mean, to trivialize that. And that's how you end up just like destroying an entire worthwhile movement in the Me Too movement. And just for like the people who don't get the difference here, the reason why the inclination should be to believe women when they come forward about sexual assault is because there's no incentive to put that out there. It is almost always just completely destructive to the woman who puts that. Her reputation is dragged through the mud. I mean, it's traumatic. There's no reason to do it. You have no incentive to do it. Whereas with this, she has every incentive to do it. This is politics, and she's trying to win. Of course she did it. Of course this came from her advisors. Who else would it come from? And so the fact that the incentives are all in favor of her lying or embellishing or shading the truth or whatever makes this completely different. Not to mention it's just insane to think that way. But that's how sort of like simple some of the analysis of this.
Well, it's Adolf Reed. It's essentialism. And I mean, it's actually functionally profoundly destructive and antithetical to any attempt at progressive politics.
And on the handshake specifically, I thought Nina Turner said it best. She got asked about it. She's like, you just shake your colleague's hand. But that piece in the LA Times, again, it tried to equate it like it was some weird bad boyfriend situation. Just give me a hug, baby. Can't we be friends?
Come on, we're all good.
Right. It's like,
Bernie.
No, he just wants to shake her hand.
And if there's any abused spouse in this dynamic, I think we know who it is.
Somebody's gaslighting.
Yeah, somebody's being gaslit to the max.
Yeah, that piece was insane.
You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.